The moment you stop reaching out, stop explaining yourself, stop trying to be understood, something subtle but powerful begins to shift inside her mind. Because silence is not empty, it is loud, it creates space, and in that space emotions that were once muted by familiarity suddenly rise to the surface. So if you have ever wondered why a woman starts thinking about you more the moment you go quiet, it is because the human psyche is deeply unsettled by the sudden absence of emotional patterns it had grown accustomed to. And the hook here is simple yet profound. Your silence does not push her away. It pulls her inward, forcing her to confront feelings she may not have fully processed when you were always present. When connection is consistent, the brain relaxes. It categorizes the bond as stable and predictable, which is comforting but also numbing. And in intimate relationships, especially, predictability slowly dulls emotional intensity, not because attraction is gone, but because the nervous system adapts. So when you are always available, always responsive, always emotionally present, her mind places you in a safe mental category where urgency disappears and desire, which thrives on contrast and emotional movement, quietly softens. The moment that rhythm breaks, when messages stop coming, when your energy withdraws without drama or explanation, the brain experiences a psychological gap, and the mind hates gaps, it seeks to fill them, to make sense of what changed. And this is where missing you begins, not as a conscious decision, but as a neurological and emotional response. Her mind starts replaying interactions, rereading conversations in memory, searching for clues, not because she is trying to manipulate the situation, but because uncertainty activates deeper emotional processing than certainty ever does. And silence introduces uncertainty in its purest form. At a deeper level, your absence triggers what psychologists call attachment activation, especially if there was emotional or physical intimacy. Because intimacy wires the brain to expect access to another person as a source of emotional regulation, comfort, excitement, and validation. So when that source suddenly goes offline, the emotional system reacts with heightened awareness, longing, and reflection. She begins to feel the weight of what is no longer being given, the laughter that is missing, the attention that is gone, the subtle feeling of being seen that only existed when you were there. And this is important. She does not miss you because you disappeared to provoke a reaction. She misses you because your silence removes the emotional mirror she unconsciously relied on. When you were present, your interest validated her sense of desirability, her emotional significance, and her place in your world. And once that validation stops, the mind turns inward and asks uncomfortable questions. Questions about her impact on you, her value in the connection, and whether she misjudged the emotional balance between you. This internal questioning intensifies attraction, because the brain is now working to restore equilibrium, and restoration often begins with desire. Silence also disrupts narrative control, because as long as you are communicating, she can predict your emotional position, but when you go quiet, she loses that narrative, and the unknown becomes a canvas onto which emotions are projected, and projection is powerful, because it often idealizes what is missing. The mind starts focusing on your best qualities, the moments of chemistry, the emotional highs, while minimizing the ordinary or flawed parts of the connection, and this selective memory strengthens emotional longing. In intimacy and sexual relationships, this effect is amplified because desire is not driven by constant availability, but by emotional polarity, presence and absence, closeness and distance. And silence creates distance without rejection, which is the most potent form of absence, because it leaves the door open psychologically. She does not feel pushed away, she feels the space you once occupied, and that space becomes charged with meaning. On a subconscious level, your silence also communicates self-possession, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded way, because when someone does not chase, does not over-explain, does not collapse emotionally when connection pauses. The brain interprets that as emotional stability and internal fullness, traits that are deeply attractive at a primal level. It signals that your life identity and emotional center do not revolve around external validation. And this creates respect alongside desire, because attraction grows when admiration exists. Her mind begins to recalibrate how she perceives you, shifting from someone who was always there to someone who has depth, boundaries, and an internal world she no longer has full access to. That loss of access ignites curiosity, and curiosity is one of the strongest emotional fuels in romantic and sexual psychology. She wonders what you are thinking, what you are feeling, whether you miss her too, whether she mattered as much as she thought. And each unanswered question pulls her emotional focus back to you. Silence also removes emotional noise, because constant communication often fills space with triviality, updates, reassurance, and casual intimacy. But when that stops, what remains are the core emotional impressions. The moments that actually mattered, the way you made her feel when connection was alive. And those feelings surface with greater clarity. This is why silence often makes emotions feel stronger in hindsight than they felt in real time. Because the mind is no longer distracted by the present, it is immersed in emotional memory. There is also a deeper power dynamic at play, not one of control, but of psychological balance, because relationships unconsciously operate on perceived emotional investment. And when you step back without hostility or neediness, the balance shifts, prompting her to emotionally step forward to compensate, and that forward movement often manifests as missing you. She may not even label it that way at first. It may appear as restlessness, distraction, checking her phone more often, or thinking about you at unexpected moments. But these are all signs of emotional recalibration happening beneath the surface. Importantly, this process only works when the connection had genuine substance. Because silence does not create feelings, it reveals them, and if intimacy, attraction, and emotional resonance were present, your absence acts like a spotlight, illuminating what was taken for granted. This is why going silent feels so powerful yet so misunderstood, because it is not about manipulation. It is about allowing the psychological truth of the connection to emerge without interference. And that truth often includes longing, reflection, and emotional gravity. As part one comes to a close, the foundation is clear. Silence activates the mind, disrupts emotional patterns, and brings hidden feelings to the surface, not through force, but through absence. And this is only the beginning of the deeper psychological layers that explain why missing you becomes almost inevitable once you step back. So would you like me to continue to part two and go deeper into the emotional and sexual dynamics that unfold after the silence settles? Once silence is established, the emotional currents that were previously muted by constant presence begin to intensify, because the mind is wired to fill voids. And in intimate relationships, these voids are never empty. They are charged with memory, desire, and expectation. When you stop responding, when you stop actively engaging, her brain doesn't simply register your absence as neutral. It interprets it as a deviation from the established emotional pattern, and the nervous system reacts with heightened alertness. Dopamine pathways, which are strongly linked to desire and reward, start firing more frequently as her mind recalls the pleasure, excitement, and validation associated with your attention. This is why she starts thinking about you during seemingly random moments, in the shower, while walking, even in mundane tasks, because the absence of stimulation triggers a craving for the emotional highs that only you provided. At the same time, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, begins its subtle tug, particularly if intimacy or vulnerability was shared previously. Oxytocin doesn't just foster closeness in the moment. It creates an emotional imprint, a memory of connection, safety, and arousal. When you go silent, that imprint is left without reinforcement, and her subconscious experiences it as a quiet ache, a need for reconnection that is both emotional and, on a deeper level, hormonal. What makes this phenomenon psychologically fascinating is that it operates largely outside of conscious control. She may not say, "I miss him," immediately, but her thoughts, behaviors, and emotions begin to orbit the absence. She may replay conversations, analyze your past gestures, or imagine potential future interactions. These mental exercises are not deliberate strategies. They are the brain attempting to resolve the uncertainty that your silence creates. Uncertainty in intimate relationships is a powerful amplifier of attraction because it activates the brain's reward system. Predictability is comforting, but it does not excite uncertainty, especially in the context of emotional and sexual dynamics, creates tension, anticipation, and longing, all of which are ingredients for deep desire. Additionally, your silence forces her to confront her emotional independence, which can be uncomfortable but also illuminating. Many women, like men, may unconsciously rely on external cues for validation, and when those cues stop, the mind searches inward for self-regulation, often circling back to the person who is now absent. This process strengthens emotional ties because she becomes acutely aware of the space you occupy in her psyche, a space she may not have fully recognized when you were constantly present. Silence also magnifies the sexual tension that naturally exists in intimate relationships. Human desire thrives on contrast. The push and pull between closeness and distance, availability and mystery, intensity and restraint. By stepping back, you create that contrast, not as a game, but as a natural consequence of absence. Her imagination begins to fill the gap with scenarios, fantasies, and reflections of what she values about you physically, emotionally, and sexually. The very act of imagining these interactions increases dopamine and adrenaline, heightening sexual interest and emotional investment simultaneously. On a social level, your silence can also amplify her awareness of your perceived value, not in a superficial sense, but in a psychological one. When someone is constantly available, their presence is taken for granted. When they step back, suddenly their qualities, confidence, stability, attentiveness, become more noticeable, more significant. This perceived increase in value is not vanity. It is the brain's natural response to scarcity and contrast, a principle that operates across human attraction and desire. Another layer lies in emotional projection. Silence removes your immediate influence over her thoughts and feelings, allowing her subconscious to project desires, insecurities, and hopes onto you. She may idealize moments, remember your best qualities, or even reinterpret ambiguous interactions in a more positive light. This projection deepens emotional engagement, because she is no longer just responding to reality. She is responding to a complex, self-generated image of you that occupies her mental space far more than when you were constantly communicating. Importantly, this effect is amplified when previous interactions involved vulnerability or deep emotional sharing. When trust and intimacy are established, your presence becomes more than just physical or conversational, it becomes a psychological anchor. Removing that anchor, even briefly, destabilizes the emotional equilibrium, causing her to search for the source of safety, connection, and validation that only you provided. In essence, your silence acts as a magnifying glass for the emotional significance you already hold, intensifying feelings that were perhaps underappreciated during constant interaction. Furthermore, silence subtly communicates boundaries and self-possession, traits that are deeply attractive in intimate relationships. When a man can step back without neediness, without explanation, without emotional collapse, it signals confidence, emotional independence, and internal stability. These qualities are instinctively recognized as markers of reliability and emotional strength, and they elevate the perceived desirability of a partner at both conscious and subconscious levels. Her mind interprets this calm absence not as rejection, but as the presence of an inner world she cannot fully access, creating curiosity, admiration, and emotional yearning simultaneously. Over time, this internal process evolves into a form of emotional pull that is difficult to resist. The longing is reinforced by both psychological mechanisms, uncertainty, projection, attachment, and physiological responses, dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline. These systems converge, producing an intense awareness of you in her mental and emotional landscape. What initially began as simple silence transforms into a profound psychological experience. She is processing your absence, evaluating the depth of her feelings, and recalibrating her emotional priorities. This is why going silent is not merely a strategy, it is an unveiling of emotional reality. The mind, deprived of constant reassurance, begins to confront what is genuinely valued, what is truly desired, and what was previously unnoticed. At this stage, she may exhibit behaviors that indicate internal preoccupation, lingering thoughts, subtle attempts at re-engagement, or even indirect signals of emotional investment. These are not manipulative actions. They are natural consequences of the brain seeking balance and resolution in the absence of predictable emotional input. By allowing silence to do its work, you create a psychological environment where reflection, desire, and emotional intensity emerge organically, because absence illuminates presence more clearly than constant attention ever could. Would you like me to continue to part 3, where we explore the final, most profound layers of sexual, emotional, and subconscious dynamics, and how this understanding can be integrated into authentic intimacy? When we move into the final layer of understanding, it becomes clear that the psychology behind why women miss you when you go silent is not just about simple absence or attention manipulation. It's about activating a deep interplay of emotional, sexual, and subconscious dynamics that have been at work since the earliest stages of attachment. Once silence has been established in her mind, begins the internal process of reflection, longing, and projection. The next phase is the crystallization of emotional and sexual tension into conscious awareness. Her thoughts are no longer fragmented. They start to converge on the essence of the connection you share, the energy, the intimacy, and the chemistry that were always present, but often taken for granted. This is where the subtle power of emotional polarity becomes most evident, because desire and attachment are rarely linear. They thrive on peaks and valleys, on closeness and distance, on the dance between presence and absence. By withdrawing your immediate influence, your silence creates a natural fluctuation, a rhythm that forces her nervous system and emotional processing into a heightened state of alertness. Her brain starts to replay moments of laughter, of vulnerability, of sexual connection, each memory slightly idealized, because it now exists without immediate context or interaction. This idealization is not fantasy in a purely fictional sense. It is a reconstruction of emotional experience that highlights the highs, the warmth, the sense of being seen and desired that you provided. At the same time, her mind begins to overlay possibilities and scenarios onto these memories, exploring what could happen if connection were restored. This combination of memory and anticipation generates a potent cocktail of dopamine, norepinephrine, and oxytocin, which together heighten emotional intensity, sexual arousal, and longing. The paradox of silence is that it feels like absence, yet it magnifies presence. The more your direct attention is removed, the more she experiences you internally, in thought, in desire, in emotional resonance. This is why missing you becomes more than just a feeling. It becomes a psychological inevitability, a process of your emotional footprint expanding in her consciousness. At a deeper, almost primal level, silence activates the attachment system in a way that constant presence never can. Women, like men, have evolved to respond to subtle cues of availability and value. When these cues change, the brain recalibrates. Attachment theory explains that secure bonds thrive on reliability, but they are most deeply felt when the partner demonstrates both presence and autonomy. By going silent without hostility or drama, you signal emotional autonomy, self-possession, and internal stability, all of which heighten perceived value and desirability. The resulting longing is not insecurity, it is attraction magnified by respect and admiration. Sexual tension, in particular, is intensified by this dynamic. Desire is not sustained solely by physical proximity. It is reinforced by emotional and psychological interplay. When a woman internalizes your absence, the sexual energy that existed in shared moments does not dissipate. It grows in intensity because it is now filtered through reflection, anticipation, and curiosity. Her imagination becomes an active participant in the dynamic, replaying physical intimacy, emotional exchange, and subtle gestures that once may have seemed ordinary. This mental and emotional rehearsal deepens her attraction, creating a sense of urgency and longing that is both conscious and subconscious. Another critical layer is the reinforcement of your emotional hierarchy. Silence communicates that your time, energy, and attention are valuable and not indiscriminately available. In intimate relationships, respect and desire are closely linked. When a partner demonstrates self-possession and independence, it elevates their position in the emotional hierarchy, making their presence more compelling and their absence more felt. She notices what she once overlooked, considers what she stands to lose, and emotionally gravitates toward the space you occupy. The effect is cumulative. Each day of thoughtful silence without neediness allows her nervous system to cycle through longing, reflection, projection, and anticipation, reinforcing attachment and desire in a way that presence alone cannot achieve. At a subconscious level, she begins to construct internal narratives about your value, your intentions, and your emotional depth. These narratives are not controlled by her conscious mind. They are emergent properties of attachment, desire, and curiosity interacting within the framework of absence and presence. Importantly, this process works best when authenticity underpins it. Silence is not a tool for manipulation, it is a natural amplifier of existing emotional truth. If the connection is shallow, silence merely creates confusion or disinterest. If it is deep, silence reveals the emotional and sexual significance of the bond, magnifying what already exists. In essence, missing you is the mind's way of reconciling the absence of emotional input with the presence of previously established attachment and desire. It is a neurological and psychological echo of the connection that cannot be ignored. As these dynamics unfold, she may begin to exhibit subtle or overt behaviors that reflect her internal processing, checking in more frequently, sending indirect signals, increasing emotional openness, or simply dwelling on memories of your interaction. Each behavior is a reflection of her mind, engaging with the absence, testing boundaries, and recalibrating desire and attachment. The beauty of this process is that it ultimately leads to a more balanced, mutually attentive dynamic once re-engagement occurs, because the longing and reflection have clarified what is truly valued. By allowing silence to work without interference, the emotional system completes a cycle of attachment reinforcement, desire intensification, and psychological clarity. In conclusion, the psychology behind why women miss you when you go silent is a multi-layered interplay of emotional reflection, subconscious attachment, sexual tension, and admiration for emotional autonomy. Silence is not emptiness, it is a space where desire is amplified, attachment is recalibrated, and the mind projects, idealizes, and intensifies feelings that may have been muted by constant presence. The absence does not push her away, it pulls her inward, forcing her to confront the value of your connection, the depth of her emotions, and the significance of your shared intimacy. When used authentically, silence becomes a mirror of emotional truth, revealing the weight of connection in a way that constant attention rarely can, And in that mirror, she sees what she truly misses, the essence of you. Not just your presence, but the emotional and sexual resonance that defines the bond between you. This is why stepping back, even briefly, can create profound longing, deeper appreciation, and heightened desire, ultimately strengthening intimacy and emotional connection when presence returns.